Hi, my name is Sarah Lynn. I'm the head founder and tutor of Bettering Youth, an academic tutoring company that blends emotional well-being coaching. I'm really excited because we are starting a brand new series, and it's called the Secrets of an English Tutor or Secrets of a Maths Tutor. And these are going to be small, very impactful techniques, workshops, tools that your child, whether they are in year 5 all the way through to GCSE, can use to help them bridge gaps and really truly thrive within the classroom. So, as mentioned, the topic for this week is English. Now, when I was working with one of our students preparing for their entrance level exams, they asked, is a phrase the same as a subordinate clause? The thinking behind this is that both a phrase and a subordinate clause do not stand on its own. They don't make sense. They need either an additional clause or to be added to something else in order to form a full thought. I can totally understand where they're coming from. Let's dive in a little bit more. But first, a quick reminder. The reminder is that every single week, you will be seeing from myself in your inbox as we look at not just a primary or middle school approach to skills, but also how it flows straight through to secondary school as well. We are diving in with, is a phrase the same as a subordinate clause? And I just noticed that there is a spelling mistake on there. So bear with me. We're all improving together. First and foremost, it's really important that we get the definition for both of these. It wasn't until I started going through my teaching degree and then being a teacher myself that I started to hone in on all of the nuances around grammar. So let's get some definitions down. A phrase. A phrase is a group of words that work together, but importantly, they do not have a subject and a verb. Now, a reminder, a subject is a person or a thing completing an action. Under the table is a really good example of a phrase. It has no subject and no verb, so it cannot stand as a complete thought. On the other hand, we have a subordinate clause. Again, a subordinate clause is a group of words that do have both a subject and a verb. However, they cannot stand alone because it relies on an independent clause to make sense. When the clock struck 12, it has a subject, the clock, and it has the verb, struck. But if I went up to your mom or to your child and I said, when the clock strikes 12, what would their reaction be? They would be like, and what happens next? Because it's not a complete thought. So now that we know both of them, it's important that we understand all of the different forms that we can get within a phrase so that way they're recognizable. First and foremost, we have a noun phrase. Now, a noun phrase is introduced quite early on. We might see it in Key Stage 2. So we're looking at between year 4 and year 6's, students will be experiencing noun phrases. Maybe even a little bit younger, perhaps just not explicitly taught as a noun phrase, or maybe they just forgot the terminology altogether, which likely is the case. So that's why repetition is important. So a noun phrase is a group of words that includes a noun, so the main word, and modifiers, which are adjectives, describing words, articles, a or an, and other descriptors. It gives it more detail about the noun, but please remember there are no verbs here. So you might have something like the spooky haunted house. Well, spooky and haunted are modifying our noun house. Next, we have prepositional phrases. So prepositional phrases are going to be introduced a little bit later on in the curriculum, but we will still start seeing it in Key Stage 2 moving through Key Stage 3. We have a prepositional phrase that begins with a preposition and ends with the object of the preposition. Now remember, what is a preposition? A preposition Preposition. It tells us about, you guessed it, position. It can also tell us about duration, direction, and time. So verb phrases is made up of the main verb and any auxiliary or modifying verbs of the sentence. So you might have are playing. So you don't put children in that because that is a noun completing a verb and that would make it no longer a phrase. But just the part are playing. They, maybe not they, but were running. So it's the verb and any modifying word around it. Let's see if you can identify these phrase types. We have under the table, running quickly, after the big storm, have been studying, the delicious chocolate cake, the beautifully written letter from her grandmother. Pause the video, take a second, ask your child if they may know even straight off the bat or not. This will help you identify their level of understanding for phrases as well as your own. Okay, welcome back. Let's see how you did. The first one, under the table. The giveaway here is that under is telling us about positioning, which makes it a prepositional phrase. Running quickly. The clue here is that we include a verb as well as a modifier, quickly, which makes it a verb phrase. After the big storm. After tells us about timing. So again, this is a prepositional phrase. Make sure you don't get too caught up in thinking it is a noun phrase though. Have been studying. Again, studying is a verb, which makes it a verb phrase. The delicious chocolate cake. You guessed it, a noun phrase. And here's a little tip. If you would have had a third adjective in there, the delicious chocolate sponge cake, then that would have also been an example of rule of three, but we'll explore that a little bit more. The beautifully written letter from her grandmother. What do you think that one is? You guessed it. That is our noun phrase. All right, heading over to our subordinate clauses. So now that we understand that that a phrase will never have a noun and a phrase in it, we are going to move over to a subordinate clause. Now remember, a subordinate clause does have a subject, which is typically the noun, and a verb, but it cannot make sense on its own. It's there because they typically adds extra detail. For example, if we just had the sentence, she was late, it started raining. It could work if we wanted to make our sentence really choppy. However, we want a variety of sentence structures, especially as your child looks to improve their grade. And so we want to include ways of connecting. A subordinate clause is a great way to bridge together those choppy sentences. We use a subordinating conjunction. Can you spot the subordinating conjunction here? She was late because it started raining. If you said because, well done you. Because is our subordinating conjunction, and we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail very soon. We also use subordinate clauses to connect ideas. It helps to show why or when something is taking place. We stayed inside because it was raining. It shows the reason. I'll call you when I get home. It shows when something is going to happen. Before we move on, let's take another guess at those subordinating conjunctions. A subordinating conjunction's job is to link together a main clause and the subordinate clause, the one that doesn't make sense on its own. We stayed inside. That makes sense on its own. Because it was raining does not make sense on its own, making it the subordinate conjunction, subordinate clause, with because acting as the subordinating conjunction. Sentence structure to change the pace. When we use subordinate clauses, depending on whether or not our subordinate clause begins or finishes the sentence, we will need to use a comma. Now, when we put in lots of detail, all connected by commas or semicolons, the reader doesn't ever get a full break to take a full breath. Imagine this long sentence that takes 2 or 3 lines. By the end of it, you're almost gasping for air. This can be a really intentional choice by the author. It's because they're trying to create emotion that mirrors what their own character is feeling within the reader. Sometimes we can use pace and sentence structure to create anxiety, build tension, and create suspense. We can also look at subordinate clauses for cause and effect. It lets us explain things. He passed the test because he studied hard. If you finish your homework, we can go to the park. Now I want you to notice something. There is a comma in the last sentence. If you finish your homework, comma, we can go to the park. Can you identify what part is the subordinate clause? We're asking ourselves what makes sense on its own and what does not. If you identified that if you finish your homework does not make sense on its own and is therefore the subordinate clause, you are correct. And that makes our first rule with subordinate clauses. If the subordinate clause begins the sentence, it must always have a comma. But if you notice, all of the other ones are at the end of the sentence. Because he studied hard, no comma. When I get home, no comma. Because it was raining, let me hear it, no comma. Another way that we can spot a subordinate clause is by looking at those tricky subordinating conjunctions. One of my favorite ways to teach it to students is through this acronym, I saw a wubub. They may have already heard it at school as well. It's fairly popular, but it helps us to identify these following subordinate conjunctions. If, since, as, when, after, while, although, before, until, because. And hopefully through repetition, your child will be able to learn this. My aim with students is for them to have this fully locked in their memory by the end of year 4. That's because when we come into year 5 and year 6, we're preparing for exams, and the ability to use sentence structure is already an expectation, and therefore having a strong understanding of how these sentences are formed, whether it's a complex sentence, so subordinate clause with the main clause, or a compound sentence with 2 independent clauses, we need to understand this information. And if all of that felt like a little bit of gibberish to you, don't worry. Not only can we book in sessions for these one-off skills, but you're more than welcome to check out our Instagram feed. We've been putting in lots of carousels, so various information feeds that you can scroll through that will go through a lot of these grammatical topics. And we just did one on compound complex sentences, which is around year 7, but it gives you a good idea as the basics for both a compound or a complex sentence. Let's keep going. Okay, let's compare them. A phrase, in the middle of the night. Is there a verb here? A subordinate clause. When I woke up in the middle of the night. Oh, right away, I can spot my subordinating conjunction, my I saw wubub. Can you? If you said when, then you are correct. When I woke up in the middle of the night. Not only does it have a verb, woke up, but it also has a subject, I. Phrase, hiding behind the curtain. It has a verb, but it doesn't tell me what's hiding behind the curtain. Subordinate clause. Because he was hiding behind the curtain. Because is our I saw a wub up. He is our subject, and hiding is our verb. Go on, pause the video, and either do it yourself so you can see and identify just how much you understand, or ask your child to do it themselves and see where they fall. Welcome back. Here we go, comparing phrases and subordinate clauses. Phrase, with a burst of laughter. Why do we know that is a phrase? If you reasoned that it's because there's no noun or no subject, then you are correct. Subordinate clause, although she laughed loudly. If you identified the I saw a wub up, the conjunction as although, as well as the subject being she and the verb being laughed, well done you, you are off to the races. Okay, so how can we make sure that we understand the difference now between a phrase and a subordinate clause? Does it have a verb? No. It's probably a phrase then. If it does, let's keep checking. Does it have a noun? No. It's probably a phrase. But if it does, let's keep checking. Does it make sense on its own? No. Then it's a subordinate clause. Yes, then it's a main clause or an independent clause. This is a sentence or a clause that has a subject, a verb, and makes sense on its own. And we can learn more about this together in the future. But for now, that's all I've got for you. Let me know if this was helpful. I'd really like to hear your feedback and to find out what your child felt was something that they already knew or perhaps a learning point for them. Okay, join me next week where we are talking about math. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.